I'm going to tell this story the way it actually happened, which means it starts slowly and gets worse gradually, because that is the honest shape of it. There was no single dramatic moment at the beginning. There was just a person who came into my life in an ordinary way and then would not leave it, and the realization of what was happening crept up on me the way those realizations tend to, which is slowly and then all at once. He was the brother of a coworker. I met him at a work event, a casual after-hours thing at a bar where people brought their partners and their friends, and it was all very low stakes and social. He was friendly and easy to talk to, and we had a good conversation for about 20 minutes. He asked for my number at the end of the night in a way that seemed straightforward, and I gave it to him because nothing about the situation had given me any reason not to. I thought he was probably going to ask me out, and I was not sure if I wanted to go, but I figured I could deal with that when it came up. He texted me that night to say he had a good time talking to me. I said the same. He texted the next day to say hello. I replied. He texted the day after to ask how my day was. I replied. Over the following 2 weeks, the texts came every day without exception, sometimes multiple times a day, and they were always friendly and conversational, but there was a quality to the frequency of them that I was trying not to name. I had not agreed to a relationship. I had not indicated I wanted daily contact, but declining to reply felt rude when the content of the messages was so ordinary, and I kept thinking I was probably overreacting to something that just needed a clear, kind conversation about expectations. I sent that message after 3 weeks. I told him I appreciated him reaching out, but that I was not in a place where I was looking for anything, and I hoped he understood. He replied that he understood completely, and that he was sorry for making me uncomfortable, and that he would back off. The text slowed to every 3 days, then every other day, then daily again, then multiple times a day. Over a period of about 3 weeks, he had returned to exactly the same frequency as before the conversation I had about it, as if the conversation had not happened at all. I stopped replying. The texts continued without my replies. He was texting me every day and I was not responding, and he kept going. For 2 weeks I did not reply to a single message, and the volume did not decrease. I then sent a direct message telling him I was asking him clearly not to contact me further. He apologized again, said he understood, said he had just missed talking to me. He stopped texting for 9 days. Then he started again. My coworker, his sister, was someone I got on well with, and I decided, after careful thought, to tell her what was happening. This was a difficult decision because I did not want to create a situation at work or cause problems between them, but after 9 days of resumed contact following my second explicit request for him to stop, I felt I had run out of other options. I showed her the thread and she went quiet for a long time while she read it, and then she looked at me and said she was going to talk to him. The texts stopped for 3 weeks. Then I started seeing him near my apartment. Twice in 1 week. The first time, I was getting off the bus, and he was standing at the intersection at the end of my street. We made eye contact, and he waved, and I did not wave back, and I walked into my building without stopping. The second time was outside the grocery store I used, which was 5 minutes from my apartment, and he was sitting on a bench outside, and he stood up when he saw me and started walking toward me. And I turned around and went into the store and stayed inside for 40 minutes until I felt confident he had gone. I went to the police. This time, I had everything documented. Months of texts, including dates, the specific requests to stop contact, the resumption after each request, and now 2 physical appearances near my home address, which he had presumably gotten from his sister, or from looking at my social media, or from following me. The officer I spoke to was helpful and took the documentation seriously, and a formal warning was issued to him. He stopped the texts entirely after the warning. He stopped appearing near my apartment, and for about 6 weeks, I thought it was over. Then I started getting emails from addresses I did not recognize. different email addresses each time, random strings of letters and numbers, so no two came from the same address, and blocking them was pointless. The content was not threatening. That was the maddening thing. The content was just conversational, the same tone as the text had been, asking how I was, saying he missed talking to me, saying he hoped I was well. Friendly and normal on the surface, and deeply wrong in context. I took the emails to the police, and they contacted him again. I do not know what was said in that interaction. What I know is that the emails stopped and did not resume, and what followed was 5 months of nothing. No texts, no emails, no appearances near my home. 5 months of quiet, during which I gradually started to feel like myself again. Started to feel like my apartment was mine again. Started to feel like I could walk to the grocery store without scanning every bench and every parked car and every corner. He sent one final email, 11 months after the initial police contact. It said simply that he hoped I was happy and that he was sorry for how things had gone. There was nothing threatening in it. There was nothing in it that I could take back to the police. It was the most frightening thing he ever sent me, because it told me two things at once. That he had maintained enough self-control to stay away for 11 months when he chose to, and that he had been thinking about me throughout those 11 months, had been holding on to my email address through all of them, and had decided at some point to make contact one more time just to let me know he was still there. I have not heard from him since. That was over 2 years ago. I am telling this story now because I want people to understand what this kind of thing actually looks like from the inside. It does not start with something you can immediately point to and call dangerous. It starts with someone who is a little too present, who reaches out a little too often, who responds to clear requests, to stop with a brief pause, and then continues. It looks like poor boundaries for a long time before it looks like anything else. By the time you understand what it actually is, the person has had months to learn your address, your routes, your schedule, your email, and whatever else they decided they needed. Trust the feeling. Even when you cannot yet name what the feeling is about, trust it early. I wish I had. I have to explain the setup before I get into what happened, because without the context, the story sounds less frightening than it was, and it was frightening enough that I want you to fully understand it. I was 23 and working 2 jobs at the time, one at a clothing store during the day and one at a bar 3 evenings a week. The bar shift ended at 1 in the morning, and I took public transit home because I did not own a car. The route involved a bus to a train to a 10-minute walk from my stop to my apartment building. I had been doing this same commute for about 8 months, and it had become automatic, the kind of thing you do half asleep and arrive home without remembering the journey. The first time I saw him was on the bus. He boarded 2 stops after me, which was a stop in a commercial area that was quiet at that hour, and he sat across the aisle. I noticed him the way you notice anyone who boards a mostly empty bus at 1 in the morning, just a quick registration. He was maybe 40, unremarkable looking, and he did not try to make conversation or look at me in any way that registered as uncomfortable. I forgot about him before I had even gotten off the bus. He was on the bus again the following week. Same time, same stop, sat in approximately the same spot. Again, nothing he did was overtly wrong. He looked out the window. He looked at his phone. He got off at a stop further down the line than I did. I noticed him because I remembered his face vaguely, and then I got off at my stop and walked home and did not think about it. The third time was a Thursday night, and he sat down 1 seat ahead of me rather than across the aisle. Still, nothing dramatic about it. The bus was slightly more occupied than usual, and the seat he chose was reasonable given what was available. But I found myself watching the back of his head for the rest of the ride in a way I had not done the previous 2 times. And when I got off at my stop, I checked to make sure he did not get off too. He did not. He stayed on the bus and it pulled away, and I walked home. Then, on a Saturday afternoon, in a completely different part of the city, I was at a bookstore that I went to maybe once a month. Not a regular habit, not a predictable location. I was in the back section looking at paperbacks, and I heard someone come into the aisle and I looked up. It was him. He was looking at the shelves on the other side of the aisle, and he had not looked at me yet. And for a few seconds, I stood there with a paperback in my hand, and I felt the specific sensation of understanding something that you have been not quite understanding for a while. 4 times. A bus route at 1 a.m, and now a bookstore on a Saturday afternoon in a different neighborhood. I did not know his name. He had never spoken to me. He had never done anything that would justify the alarm I felt standing in that aisle. But 4 times is a pattern, and my body knew it before my brain had finished the calculation. I put the book back, and I left the store without buying anything, and I walked around the corner and I stood there, and I waited to see if he came out. He did, about 5 minutes later, and he walked in the opposite direction from me and did not look around. I started paying attention in a way I had not been paying attention before, which is how I noticed the next thing. My apartment building had a small parking area at the back that was accessed through a gate on the side street. I did not have a car, but the gate was visible from my kitchen window, and I sometimes glanced out at it out of habit. About 2 weeks after the bookstore, I was in the kitchen making coffee at around 11 at night, and I looked out at the gate, and there was someone standing on the side street, just outside it, facing the building. The street was not well lit and I could not see clearly, but the general build and the specific stillness of the person made something in my chest tighten. I turned off my kitchen light and I watched from the window in the dark. The person stood there for about 20 minutes and then walked away in the direction of the main road. I do not know with certainty that it was him. I was not close enough, and the lighting was not good enough for certainty. What I know is that the feeling I had watching that figure stand outside my building was the same feeling I had standing in the bookstore aisle, and that feeling was the same feeling I had registered on the bus without fully naming it, that sense of being known to someone who you do not know. I told my manager at the bar what was happening, and she changed my schedule so that I was never the last one there, and one of the male staff members walked me to my transit stop on every shift for the rest of the time I worked there. I reported it to police who, again, were kind but honest that what I had was a series of coincidences that would be difficult to act on without more direct contact or evidence of following. He showed up on the bus one more time after that. I had changed my route so that I took the train first and the bus second, which meant I was boarding at a different stop. When he got on at his usual stop and walked down the aisle and saw me sitting there, something passed across his face very briefly before he went to the back of the bus. Not surprise exactly. Something more controlled than surprise. Like a person who has been caught in something and is deciding quickly how to respond to it. He got off one stop later, not at his usual stop and not at a stop anywhere near where I was getting off. He got off in the middle of the route, which is not something you do unless the place you are going suddenly changes. I do not know his name. I do not know where he lives or what he does or how he found me. What I know is that he was on that bus enough times to learn my schedule, and he knew what bookstore I went to on weekend afternoons, and he stood outside my building one night for 20 minutes and then walked away, and then the one time I changed my route and he saw me somewhere. He was not expecting me. He got off the bus early rather than continue on his usual path. I think about that last detail most. The getting off early, because it means he knew he had been seen doing something he was not supposed to be doing. It means he understood, in that moment, that the situation had changed, which means he understood, in all the moments before it, that what he had been doing was not something I would accept if I knew about it. He never approached me. He never spoke to me, and yet, knowing he was out there, knowing he had mapped the geography of my nights, was enough to make me move through my own city differently for the better part of 2 years. I still check the faces on the bus. All of them, every time. I probably always will. I want to start by telling you that I am not someone who is easily frightened by other people. I grew up in a city. I have lived alone for most of my adult life, and I have always been comfortable navigating the world by myself. I take reasonable precautions, the same ones most women take without thinking about them. The awareness of who is around you, the keys in your hand before you get to the door, the phone call you make so someone knows where you are. Normal things, sensible things, things that had always been enough. Until they were not. I was 26 and had recently moved to a new apartment in a neighborhood I did not know well yet. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on a busy enough street, and I had chosen it partly for that reason. The feeling of being surrounded by enough activity that you never felt isolated. There was a coffee shop 2 blocks away that I started going to every morning before work. It became my routine very quickly, the way routines do when you move somewhere new and are trying to build a sense of belonging. Same time every morning, same order, same table by the window if it was available. I noticed him for the first time about 6 weeks after I moved in. He was at the coffee shop when I arrived one morning, sitting at the counter, and he looked at me when I came in. Nothing unusual about that. People look at the door when it opens. What I registered, without thinking too much about it in the moment, was that he was still looking when I had already ordered and moved away from the counter. But I was new to the neighborhood, and sometimes people recognize a new face in a place they consider their local, and it registers to them. I did not think about it much. He was there the next morning, and the morning after that. He always arrived before me, and he always looked up when I walked in. By the end of the 2nd week, I had noticed him enough times to think of him as a regular, the way you mentally categorize the people you see repeatedly in a place. Just a regular, a neighborhood person, fine. Then one evening I was at the grocery store, about 4 blocks from my apartment, which I did not go to every day, which was not part of any obvious routine, and he was there, standing in the bread aisle, and when I turned down the aisle, he looked up from the shelf, and his face did something complicated that I did not have words for in that moment. Something between being caught and recovering from being caught. A very fast adjustment of expression. He said hi. He said he recognized me from the coffee shop, and his tone was easy and friendly, and I said hi back and kept walking. I thought about it on the way home. The coffee shop was one thing. The grocery store on an irregular evening was another. But those 2 data points on their own are not a pattern. I told myself that. You share a neighborhood with people. You run into them in multiple places. That is how neighborhoods work. About a week later, I left work early because I was not feeling well. This was unusual for me, and it was not something I had told anyone. I did not post about it or message anyone about it. I just packed up and left the office and took a slightly different route home than I usually did because I felt like walking rather than taking the train. It was the middle of the afternoon on a day I was normally at work. He was on my street, standing on the opposite side of the road, about half a block from my building, looking at his phone. He did not see me come around the corner. I stopped when I saw him, and I stood there for a moment, and I watched him. And he was just standing there looking at his phone on my specific street at a time of day when I was never usually there. He did not look like he was going anywhere. He looked like he was waiting. I turned around and went to a cafe 2 streets over, and I sat there for an hour, and I thought about the coffee shop and the grocery store and now this, and I felt the specific cold clarity of understanding something you have been almost understanding for several weeks. He knew which building I lived in. He may have known which floor. He had been coming to the coffee shop every morning because he had learned that I went there every morning, and the grocery store and the street were not coincidences. Nothing had been a coincidence. I called a friend and asked her to meet me. I did not want to go home alone. When we went back to my building, he was gone from the street, but I checked every face in every car parked within view of my entrance before I went inside. I triple-locked my door that night for the first time since I had moved in. I went to the coffee shop the next morning because I was determined not to let the fear change my life before I had more information. He was not there. He was not there the morning after. He did not come back to the coffee shop for the next 3 weeks. Then, one evening, I got a Facebook friend request from an account I did not recognize. The profile picture was distant and grainy. The account had almost no activity on it. I looked at the mutual friends list, and there were none. I looked at the name, and it meant nothing to me. I was about to dismiss it when I noticed that the account had liked 2 of my posts from years ago, both of them old enough that even I had forgotten about them. He had been looking at my profile, going back years, before he even sent the request. I went to the police that week. I brought everything I had, which was a pattern of sightings I had been keeping notes on since the grocery store incident, the Facebook request, and a screenshot of the profile. The officer I spoke to was not dismissive, which I appreciated, but he was also honest with me that what I had, while clearly concerning, did not at that point meet the threshold for a restraining order in my state. He told me to keep documenting everything, to vary my routes and routines, and to let them know immediately if anything escalated. I moved apartments 4 months after the grocery store. Not because he had done anything beyond what I have described, not because anything dramatic happened, but because the feeling of knowing that someone had learned the map of my daily life, had watched me long enough to understand my patterns, had stood on my street waiting for me, was a feeling I could not live inside comfortably anymore. The apartment was fine, the neighborhood was fine, but he knew it, and that made it no longer mine in the way it needed to be. I have never seen him again. I do not know if he moved on or if he is doing the same thing to someone else in the same neighborhood. I do not know how long he was watching me before I noticed the coffee shop. I do not know how he found out which street I lived on. I just know that someone spent several weeks learning the architecture of my ordinary life without my knowledge, and that by the time I understood what was happening, he already knew more about my routine than most of my friends did. I vary my routes now, always, every day, even when I am tired and the direct route is right there. The coffee shop near my new apartment is good, but I go on different days at different times, and I never sit with my back to the door. Some habits form for good reasons. These are mine.